Okay, stop thinking. So, anybody voting for one? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so fair number. Okay, anybody voting for 2? Wow. All right. Anybody voting for 3? A few. Okay. Well, I guess I've been. Oh, any abstentions? Yeah, Garrett. So, what choice should we add here?
Well, one thing what I have thought a lot about, and I guess we had, including you, numerous meetings about this, is a more interesting question for me to ask is, what are the core competencies of residential research-based universities? And I buy a lot of your arguments that they cannot consist of delivering information. And so one aspect of taking the cost structure into account, relating maybe also to Peter's remark, I mean, the Open University capitalizes its courses, so it spends, let's say, $2 million on a course.
Right.
And then they teach it to 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 people. And in the end, you can drive down costs, even there's a high capitalization.
Yeah.
And so one could develop a model where one would reward the best teachers to develop courses which are then used on a very large scale.
So let me submit that you believe we should take these things seriously. So I didn't say what we should do about them, and you're suggesting something we might do.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I could also vote for one.
Okay. Yeah, so it's come up twice here, the Open University. It's kind of interesting, and it seems to me it isn't very clear. I should also say that any knowledge I have had of the Open University is pretty stale. But one thing is that the Open University has positioned itself as a kind of a high-cost, low-cost alternative. So they have not been aggressive to try to drive their costs really low. They've realized a cost structure that's something on the order of 2/3 of what sort of traditional educational institutions offer. So it's a distance learning institution, one of the oldest and certainly best, based in the UK, although they operate in some other countries, not here, interestingly. But they've not been aggressive in really trying to reduce their costs. And so I don't know how they're doing with respect to inflation, but Mark Eisenstadt, whom Gerhard and others know, reckons that they were coming in at maybe 2/3 of the cost of traditional education. And the reason they're not saving all that much is that they have a really high emphasis on quality. Again, part of what I think is sad here is that quality is maybe not the long-term right answer here. Another thing that's interesting is that when the rest of British higher education changed, which it did very dramatically, so they used to have a very elite-oriented system where they only aspired to offer higher education to a very small proportion of the population. Interestingly, they've turned that policy around, and they actually now have a higher proportion of the population in higher ed than the U.S. does. But as that has happened, and there have become more opportunities for study at traditional institutions, the Open University has definitely suffered. So they did really well when most people were being shut out of the traditional system, less well just in terms of the numbers when other opportunities are there. And so that's kind of good news for us in that that's showing that given the choice, people will tend to favor being in a residential university. But again, I want to say there's nothing saying here that people don't think a residential university is better. The question is, how much are they willing to pay for it? And the way we've been running things, we are asking them to pay more and more on what seems to me hard to argue is a sustainable basis, but that's what we've been doing. Yeah?
One of the things that you haven't talked about at all is the need for lifelong learning and the fact that we only train people to a certain level, and after that they really need to keep learning so that they can, say, do evidence-based practice. That's what I try to teach my students, that they've got to learn to use Web of Science and have access to PDF files. We're not doing anything about that. As far as I know,
Yeah.
once you graduate from here, you cannot continue to use the library, etc. Where
Yeah.
and so they need to keep up.
This is an excellent point, and it's one that Gerhard in particular has really developed, and indeed it would make sense to include it in here. And MIT also comes up as an interesting institution there. So MIT is apparently taking at least some steps in that direction of viewing the time someone is an undergrad, let's say, as kind of the prefix to an extended engagement. So yeah, I agree completely. And I think Ellie Noam would agree too, that I think that's in the spirit of what he's saying universities really need to be delivering is some more persistent kind of deeper kind of engagement. Yeah.
Something I've noticed that happens in industry sometimes is when, for example, you have a list of alternatives that are providing success outside of the traditional academic university setting. Oftentimes what happens is like an institution like, I don't know if CU can do it, that they can begin to adopt and absorb some of these ideas within themselves, therefore making themselves more competitive. If it were, for example, like if you were taking into perspective the individual who's paying the tuition, right, you could say, well, if you don't know what you're going to do and there's a possibility you might fail out, why don't you take a couple classes at a community college, right?
Yeah.
Or discover in-state tuition. Like there's ways people can make it so that things aren't so expensive for each individual, right? And I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. So if we vote for one and we have some spirit of optimism, then we're imagining somehow that we could do something, and that I think is what you're suggesting. So we could adjust our practices. If you think about that memo about the adjusting the critical thinking requirements, we're kind of in a box, right? So anything that we do that in fact sacrifices credit hours, hurts us directly. And as virtually all higher institutions of higher education are nonprofits, not quite all. So the University of Phoenix is a for-profit institution, but virtually all of us are nonprofits. And one of the things that means is that we don't have reserves to invest. So we have to kind of keep the wheels rolling at the same time that we try to make whatever modifications we're going to run. Interestingly, the Open University, bringing them back again, they used to actually be in that bind, and then they kind of got out of it. So actually the Thatcher government renegotiated the kind of deal that the government had. Higher education in England is a government operation. And so the Open University was actually allowed to run and maintain and reinvest an operating surplus. But institutions like ours, we don't really have that. So anything that we do that ends up, diverting people to other entities, if it hurts economically, it's hard for us to do it. But as a general proposition, I'd say, yeah, you're certainly right. We need to be thinking about how to adjust these things. The question is, are we? I'd say the answer is no. Right. So if you look at Flagship 2030, which we just went through, I mean, it was involved. There's a lot to like in Flagship 2030, but unquestionably, it's a map for doing what we've always done a little better. Right. It's not a map for responding to a changed landscape.